The only thing colder than the December air in my father's attic was the 60-year-old stone I called a heart. For as long as I could remember, it had been a dense, unmovable weight in my chest, a monument to the day my mother, Lily, decided I wasn't worth staying for. She walked out of our lives when I was 5, leaving nothing behind but a lingering lavender scent on her pillow and a chasm in my soul that no amount of time could ever fill. My father, Robert, a man of few words and even fewer emotions, told me she found a new life, a better one, that didn't include a stoic husband or a quiet little girl. And I believed him. I watered that seed of abandonment with my silent tears until it grew into a gnarled, bitter tree whose roots had strangled every chance of true happiness I ever had. Comment on which city you're watching from and subscribe to the channel, because I guarantee there's more to this story than meets the eye. Now, at 62, standing amidst the ghosts of my father's meticulously ordered life, all packed into dusty cardboard boxes, the coldness was absolute. He had passed a month ago, a quiet, orderly death that matched his life. The task of emptying the house he'd lived in for 70 years fell to me, his only child. Every forgotten tie, every stack of yellowed newspapers, every neatly labeled jar of screws felt like an accusation. My own daughter, Sarah, thought this final goodbye would be therapeutic, a chance for closure. She didn't understand that for me, there was no therapy. There was only the before, a brief, hazy warmth of a mother's presence, a memory as fragile as a sunbeam, and the after, a long, gray, 57-year stretch of survival. The phone buzzed in my pocket, a jarring intrusion into the tomb-like silence of the attic. I knew it was her before I even looked. "Mom? Are you at Grandpa's?" Her voice was bright and full of a relentless cheerfulness I both envied and resented. It was a stark contrast to the dust motes dancing in the single, weak sunbeam cutting through the attic grime. "Yes, I'm here," I said, my voice as flat and gray as my surroundings. "Just sorting." "Great. I was thinking, since you're in that part of town, maybe you could finally go see Grandma Lily." "It's only 10 minutes from the house." "It's time, Mom. It's really time." There it was. The request that always felt like a dagger twisting in an old, unhealed wound. Sarah, with her boundless, naive optimism, had been trying for years to orchestrate a reunion between me and the woman who had shattered my world. She'd found the nursing home a few years back, a sterile-sounding place called Willow Creek Gardens, and had visited a few times herself. She would report back that my mother was frail and confused, words meant to evoke pity. But I felt nothing. No pity, no curiosity. Just the familiar, icy rage that had been my shield for a lifetime. "Sarah, we have been over this 100 times. I have no grandmother, and you have no great-grandmother. That woman ceased to exist for me in 1965. The silence on the line was heavy, thick with her disappointment. I knew I was hurting her, my own child, but the pain was a shield I couldn't lower. To lower it would be to expose the terrified 5-year-old girl still cowering inside me. "She's your mother, Mom." Sarah's voice was smaller now, a desperate plea. "And she's dying." Her words were meant to be a final, unanswerable argument, but to me, they were meaningless. Lily had died a long, long time ago. The only thing left was a ghost, and I refused to entertain ghosts. I ended the call, my hands trembling with a mixture of anger and something else, something I refused to name. Grief, perhaps. Not for the dying woman in the nursing home, but for the little girl who waited by the window for months, her nose pressed against the cold glass, watching for a mother who never came back. My eyes scanned the piles of boxes, a lifetime of possessions that told me nothing about the man who'd raised me. I wanted to be anywhere but here, with these feelings churning inside me. And then I saw it. Tucked away under a pile of old, moth-eaten military blankets in a dark corner, almost deliberately hidden, was a small, wooden chest. It wasn't my father's sturdy, practical style. It was different. Lighter wood, carved with delicate, swirling vines and a single, faded lily on the lid. My breath caught in my throat. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this had been hers. It was locked, a tiny, rusted brass latch holding its secrets tight. For a long moment, I considered leaving it, throwing it out with the rest of the rubbish, letting its secrets die with the dust. It would be easier, safer, but I couldn't. It was the first piece of her I had seen, let alone touched, in nearly 6 decades. After a few minutes of wrestling with the fragile lock, my fingers clumsy and shaking, I found a small screwdriver in my father's old toolbox and pried it open. The old wood groaned in protest, and the lid creaked open like a coffin. The scent that wafted out was not lavender, but the dry, papery smell of old secrets. Inside, there were no trinkets, no jewelry, no sentimental keepsakes of a life left behind. There was only a stack of letters, hundreds of them, tied in faded silk ribbons of varying colors. They were all addressed in a graceful, looping script to me. Miss Eleanor May Carter, and they were all from her. My first instinct was to slam the lid shut, to rebury the ghost. These were just pieces of paper filled with more lies, more elegant excuses from the woman who chose a different life over me. My father had protected me from her once, and I should honor that. He had built the walls around my heart for a reason. But my fingers, acting of their own accord, driven by a sliver of the 5-year-old girl who still hoped, reached for the topmost ribbon and untied it. The paper was brittle, the ink faded to a soft blue-gray. The date at the top read October 12, 1965. A few weeks after she had vanished. My heart hammered against my ribs as I began to read. My dearest, sweetest Eleanor, the letter began, "My little bird, I don't know if your father will give you this. But I have to write, I have to believe that someday you'll read these words and know that not a single second passes when I am not thinking of you. The sound of your laughter is the only music I can hear in my head. Leaving you was not a choice. My love, it was not an act of will. It was a necessity. I am sick, Eleanor, and I needed to go away to get better so I could be the mother you deserve." Sick? What did she mean, sick? The word ricocheted around the silent attic. My father had said she was vibrant, healthy, bursting with a life that our quiet home couldn't contain. He painted a picture of a woman who'd run off with a traveling salesman, a handsome charlatan who promised her adventure and glamour. He had never, not once, mentioned any illness. My hands trembled as I grabbed another letter, this one dated a month later. November 1965. Your father visited today. He brought me clean clothes. He said you asked for me every night before bed. He told you I was on a long trip. Oh, my Eleanor. My heart shattered into a million pieces right there in that sterile white room. He won't let me speak to you on the phone. He says it will only confuse you. He says he is protecting you. But it feels like he is building a wall between us. Brick by painful brick. I asked him to give you the little blue bear I sewed for you, the one with the mismatched button eyes. Did you get it? Please, God, I hope he gave you the bear. I froze. The blue bear. I had a vague, dreamlike memory of that bear, a flash of royal blue felt. 2 mismatched black buttons for eyes. I had clutched it every night for a year after she left, whispering my secrets into its worn ear, until one day, it disappeared. My father said I'd lost it in the park. My carelessness. My fault, but I hadn't. He had taken it, just like he had taken these letters. The attic suddenly felt suffocating. The air thick with the weight of my father's lifelong deception. I sank to the floor, the dusty floorboards groaning under my weight as if they knew the burden I now carried. I read on. My hunger for the truth, insatiable. Letter after letter told the same story. A mother's desperate, all-consuming love for her child. She wrote about my favorite bedtime stories, the way I scrunched up my nose when I was about to sneeze, the silly songs she used to sing to me while bathing me in the kitchen. These were not the words of a woman who had abandoned her child. These were the words of a prisoner, screaming into a void. A new wave of anger washed over me, so hot and fierce it almost made me sick. But this time, it wasn't directed at her. It was for him. For my father, the stoic saint who had raised me, who had shielded me from the selfish woman who broke my heart. He hadn't been protecting me. He had been lying to me. For my entire life. He had curated my pain, sculpted my bitterness, and allowed me to carry this stone in my chest for 60 years. For what? For shame? For pride? The letters continued through the years. The handwriting grew a little shakier, the ink sometimes smudged as if by tears. The tone grew more desperate. She wrote on my birthdays, on Christmas, on my first day of school. She imagined what I looked like, what my voice sounded like, who my friends were. I saw a picture your Aunt Carol sent me. One letter from 1975 read, "You are 16, so beautiful. Eleanor, you have my eyes. I can see that. But your father's determined chin." Carol said, "You are quiet and serious. That you get good grades. I pray you are happy. I pray your father has found a way to let joy into your life. He always struggled with that. You know, he saw joy as a kind of chaos he couldn't control. This was another crack in the foundation of my life. My father wasn't a man who struggled with joy. He was a man who seemed to resent it. Our house had been a quiet, somber place. Laughter was a rare and fleeting guest. I had always assumed it was because of his broken heart. Now I saw it differently. Maybe he wasn't mourning her loss. Maybe he was enforcing her absence. He didn't want any trace of her, any of the light and chaos she seemed to possess in her writing, to contaminate the sterile, controlled world he had built for us. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the man who taught me how to ride a bike with the man who would steal a mother from her child. I thought of my own daughter, Sarah. What would I do if I were ever separated from her? I would have torn down walls, crossed oceans, set the world on fire. I would have never, ever stopped fighting. Why had Lily stopped? The letters seemed to grow less frequent in the late 70s, and the vibrant hope in them began to fade, replaced by a dull, aching resignation. I suppose he will never give these to you, she wrote in 1980. I have to accept that. I suppose I am just a ghost in your memory, a faded photograph he keeps in a drawer, but I will not stop writing as long as I have a pen in my hand. I will write. It is the only way I can still be your mother. This sentence broke something inside me, the stone in my chest, the one that had been my constant companion for my entire life, finally cracked. A hot, painful sob escaped my lips, a sound I hadn't made in decades. It was a raw, guttural cry for the little girl who was told she wasn't wanted, and for the woman who was just now realizing she had been loved all along. With a ferocity she couldn't comprehend. The next day, I drove to Willow Creek Gardens. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel, and my stomach churned with a toxic mix of fear, guilt, and a fragile, terrifying hope. The facility smelled of antiseptic and overcooked broccoli, a scent I immediately associated with endings. A cheerful nurse with a name tag that read Brenda led me down a long, pale green hallway to room 21B. She has good days and bad days, Brenda whispered, her voice full of a professional sympathy that felt hollow. Today seems to be one of the good ones. She's been talkative. Talkative, the words seemed alien. My mother, the vibrant, poetic woman from the letters, was now reduced to a medical chart assessment. Brenda pushed the door open, and I saw her. She was a tiny, frail woman swallowed by a large wheelchair, staring out the window at a bleak, wintry courtyard. Her hair was a wisp of white, and her skin was as thin and translucent as the pages of her letters. She didn't look like a monster. She didn't look like a selfish adulteress. She looked like a bird with a broken wing. She turned her head slowly as I entered, and her eyes, a pale, cloudy blue, landed on me. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing. Just a vacant stare. My heart sank. I was too late. The woman who wrote the letters was gone, lost forever in the fog of dementia. Hello, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm Eleanor. Her eyes squinted, a flicker of something, a spark of recognition deep within the fog. Eleanor? She repeated, the name a foreign, precious sound on her tongue. My little bird. You came. A single tear slid down her wrinkled cheek, and my carefully constructed wall of resentment, 60 years in the making, crumbled into dust. I pulled a chair up beside her, my movements stiff and uncertain. What do you say to the mother you've hated for a lifetime, only to find out she was a victim, just like you? I found your letters, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. All of them. In the attic. He kept them from me. Her gaze drifted back to the window. Robert, she said, the name a sigh of ancient pain. He was a good man. In his way. But he was a proud man. So afraid of what the neighbors would say. So afraid of things he couldn't fix with a hammer and nails. Her words were disjointed, fragments of memory floating to the surface. He hated the red roses in the front garden. Said they were too loud. I loved them, a disturbing, trivial detail that explained so much. My father had always filled our yard with pale, white flowers, lilies, and gardenias. He told me red was a garish, unseemly color. It was another small lie, another piece of her he had methodically erased from my world. Over the next few weeks, I visited her every day. I brought the chest of letters with me, reading them to her one by one. Sometimes she would listen intently, a soft smile on her face, as if hearing a favorite song from long ago. Other times, she would drift away, her mind lost in its own labyrinth. But during her lucid moments, I pieced together more of the story. The sickness she wrote about was a terrifying bout of postpartum psychosis, a condition misunderstood and brutally stigmatized in the 1960s. The thoughts, she whispered one afternoon, her eyes wide with a 60-year-old fear. They were dark. So dark. I was so scared I would hurt you, my perfect little bird. I loved you so much, I thought my heart would burst. But the darkness was always there, waiting in the corners. The doctors didn't understand back then. They just sent you away. She spoke of a man named Dr. Evans, a kind doctor at a sanitarium. My father had always sneered at the very idea of therapy or psychiatry, calling it head-shrinking nonsense for the weak. Now I understood why. It was the world he had banished my mother to. He hadn't just lied about her leaving, he had lied about why. He had chosen the more socially acceptable shame of being an abandoned husband over the deep, terrifying shame of having a mentally ill wife. With each visit, another layer of my father's carefully constructed reality peeled away, revealing an ugliness I couldn't have imagined. I started to re-examine my entire childhood through this new, horrifying lens. The way he would flinch if I got too loud or boisterous. His constant emphasis on control and composure. His utter intolerance for emotional displays, which he called histrionics. He hadn't been teaching me to be strong. He had been teaching me to be silent, to be manageable, to not be like her. He was terrified of her sickness living on in me. The coldness I had carried my whole life wasn't just a reaction to her abandonment. It was a trait he had painstakingly cultivated in me, a fire he had deliberately extinguished. My anger towards him solidified into something hard and unforgiving. How could he do this? To her? To me? He had let me believe I was unlovable. He had let her believe she was forgotten. He had stolen our Liz from both of us. The conflict between me and my own daughter, Sarah, also came into sharp focus. With horrifying clarity, I saw my father in myself. The way I would shut down when Sarah became too emotional. The way I kept her at arm's length, afraid that my own brokenness would somehow damage her. I had been passing down his legacy of coldness, a generational trauma I hadn't even known existed. One evening, Sarah came over to my house. She found me in the living room, surrounded by Lily's letters, my face streaked with tears. "Mom? What's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with a concern I felt I didn't deserve. For the first time in my life, I didn't push her away. I took a deep breath and told her everything. I told her about the letters, the sickness, the lies. I told her about the blue bear with the button eyes and the red roses my father hated. As I spoke, I watched her face change from confusion to shock, then to a deep, profound sadness. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just came and sat beside me on the floor, wrapping her arms around me as I sobbed like a lost child. "I'm so sorry. Mom," she whispered into my hair. "I'm so sorry for what you both went through." In that moment, holding my daughter, feeling her warmth, I felt the first real thaw in my heart. The ice was finally, painfully, beginning to melt. A few days later, I was back in the attic, determined to finish the job. I had saved the small wooden chest for last. As I lifted it to move it, I noticed it felt slightly off balance. I ran my fingers along the inside and felt a ridge in the faded velvet lining at the bottom. It was a false bottom. My heart leaped into my throat. With trembling fingers, I worked a nail under the edge and pried it open. Beneath it lay a single, thick envelope. It wasn't from my mother. The return address was for Dr. Martin Evans, with the name of a psychiatric hospital I had never heard of. The postmark was from 1966. It was addressed not to me, but to my father. It had been opened. He had read this. My hands shook so violently I could barely tear the envelope fully open. It was a long, typewritten letter. "Mr. Carter," it began, "I am writing to you again, as a follow-up to our phone conversation. In the hopes that you will reconsider your position, Lily has made remarkable progress. Her psychosis is in remission. And with continued outpatient therapy and medication, we feel she is more than capable of returning home and resuming her role as a mother to Eleanor, her primary motivation for recovery. Her singular focus through the most difficult phases of her treatment has been her daughter. To keep them separated now would be needlessly cruel to them both. She is not the woman who left your home a year ago. She is a survivor. Please, for your daughter's sake and for your wife's, do not let outdated fears and social stigma dictate the course of their lives. She loves you both. She deserves to come home." Subscribe now. You won't believe the twist that's coming. The letter fell from my hands. fluttering to the dusty floor. This was it. The final, damning piece of evidence. This wasn't a story of a man trying to protect his child from a sick mother. This wasn't even about a man afraid of what the neighbors would think. This was about a man who had a choice, a clear choice. My mother had gotten better. She had fought her way back from the brink of madness, fueled by her love for me. She was ready to come home, and he had said no. He had listened to this doctor. He had read this letter, and he had made a conscious, deliberate decision to keep her locked away, to continue the lie, to raise me alone in his cold, quiet world. Why? The answer hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. It was simpler and more monstrous than shame or pride. It was about control. He had a new life, a quiet, orderly life without a difficult, emotional wife whose inner world he couldn't manage. A life where he was the sole hero, the tragic, devoted single father, a role that earned him sympathy and admiration. He didn't want the real, complicated, recovered Lily back. He preferred the tragic myth he had created. He hadn't just lied to me. He had sentenced her to a life without me, and me to a life without her. The floorboards of the attic seemed to sway beneath me. My vision blurred. The stone in my chest didn't just crack. It exploded, sending 60 years of repressed grief, rage, and agonizing loss tearing through my body. I collapsed onto the floor, the sound of my own screaming filling the dusty silence. It was a primal, inhuman sound. It was the sound of a life breaking in two. The life I had lived, and the life that had been stolen from me. I don't know how long I lay there, lost in a storm of agony. Eventually, the screaming subsided into ragged, empty sobs. The sun had set, and the attic was dark and cold again, but the chill no longer felt like it was coming from inside me. It was just the air. Inside, there was only a vast, aching emptiness where the stone used to be. I picked up Dr. Evans' letter, my hands now steady. There was no more confusion, no more doubt. There was only the cold, hard truth. My father, my quiet, stoic hero, was a villain. And my mother, the selfish monster of my childhood, was the greatest hero I had never known. She hadn't abandoned me. She had fought for me. She had gone into the darkness to protect me from it. And when she emerged, ready to hold me again, the door to her home, to her life, to me, had been bolted shut by the man she trusted most. I didn't pack any more boxes that night. I left the attic, got in my car, and drove. I didn't know where I was going at first, but my body knew. My car pulled into the familiar parking lot of Willow Creek Gardens. It was late, and the halls were quiet and dim. I found my mother's room and slipped inside. She was asleep, her breathing a soft, shallow rhythm in the quiet room. Her face, in the dim glow of the nightlight, looked peaceful. All the lines of worry and fear were smoothed away. I pulled the chair close to her bed and just sat there, watching her breathe. I thought of all the nights she must have lain awake, staring into the darkness, thinking of me. All the birthdays she had spent alone. All the milestones she had missed. All the love she had to give with no one to receive it. My father hadn't just stolen her from me. He had stolen me from her. He had robbed her of her entire life's purpose. The anger I felt was white hot, but it was pointless. He was gone. I couldn't scream at him, couldn't demand answers. There was no justice to be had from a ghost. But there was forgiveness. Not for him. Never for him. But for her and for myself. Forgiveness for believing the lie. Forgiveness for all the years I had let bitterness rule my heart. Forgiveness for the coldness I had shown my own daughter. Lily stirred in her sleep, a soft murmur escaping her lips. "Eleanor," she whispered, her eyes still closed. "My sweet bird." My breath hitched. Even in her dreams, she was with me. I reached out and took her hand. It was so fragile, the bones like tiny twigs beneath the paper-thin skin. It was the first time I had initiated contact, the first time I had willingly touched her. Her fingers curled weakly around mine. "I'm here, Mama," I whispered, the word feeling both strange and perfectly natural on my tongue. "I'm here. I got your letters." I finally got your letters. Her breathing hitched, and even in her sleep, a single tear escaped from the corner of her eye and traced a path through the landscape of her wrinkles. I stayed with her all night. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale pink glow into the room, her eyes fluttered open. They were clear. The fog was gone. She looked at our joined hands, then up at my face. There was no confusion in her gaze, only a deep, bottomless well of love and a sorrow so profound it stole my breath. "You came back," she whispered, her voice raspy. I squeezed her hand. "You were the one who was trying to come back," I said, my own voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Mama." "I'm so sorry, I didn't know. It wasn't your fault," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. He made his choices. But look at you. You're beautiful. You're here." We didn't need to say anything else. In the quiet of that room, with the morning sun streaming in, 60 years of pain, lies, and misunderstanding dissolved. It wasn't about explanations or apologies anymore. It was just about this. A mother and a daughter finding each other at the end of a long, dark road. I forgave her, fully and completely. And in doing so, I finally forgave myself. In the weeks that followed, I brought Sarah with me to visit. I watched as my daughter gently brushed her great-grandmother's hair, listening to the same fragmented stories I now knew by heart. I saw the connection she had longed for finally bloom. The generational chain of coldness forged by my father's fear and lies was broken. My mother passed away peacefully 2 months later. I was holding her hand. Her last words to me were, "Sing me the song, my little bird," and I did. I sang the lullaby she had written about in her first letters, a tune I didn't even realize I remembered until it came spilling from my lips. It was a song about a little bird learning to fly. After the funeral, Sarah and I went back to my father's house one last time. We stood in the empty living room, the afternoon sun lighting up the dust motes. "What are you going to do with all this?" Sarah asked, gesturing to the house. I looked around at the silent, somber rooms that had been my prison. "I'm going to plant red roses in the front yard," I said, a real smile touching my lips for the first time in as long as I could remember. Loud, garish, beautiful red roses. I had lived for 62 years with the pain of abandonment. But now I knew the truth. I had never been abandoned. I had been loved with a ferocity that defied sickness, walls, and time itself. My mother's love hadn't been a memory. It had been a promise, waiting patiently in a dusty box for me to finally come home and find it. Comment which part of the story left you speechless.